autumn, and well, I usually am not really someone who makes like TBR lists of books I want to read in like a particular month, because I'm a mood reader and I usually just like to pick what I read in the moment. But I do love making lists for autumn and like winter / Christmas, because it just, I don't know, it feels so cozy, and it's just a really lovely way, I think, to really experience the season and to like fully enjoy it. So I have gathered a bunch of books here that I think are going to be really fun to read during autumn. It's quite a mix. There are some German books, there are some children's books, there are some comics, there is a classic, so I think it's going to be fun. Yeah, let's go through them. The first one that I have here is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This was a gift from a friend of mine, I think already a while ago. Maybe it was for my birthday last year, which is almost been a year. Maybe it's been longer. But she gave it to me and it sounded a lot of fun. Usually I'm not someone who really goes for fae stories, and this is a fae story, but it does sound really good, and I think it's also because of the cover, because it's gorgeous and it does have a really autumny vibe to it with the kind of auburn colours and the raven, and the name also, An Enchantment of Ravens, sounds very autumny to me. So the story is about a woman who's a painter, and she gets to paint a portrait of a fae prince that she paints mortal sorrow in his eyes, and apparently that's like a crime. So yeah, she gets in trouble. I don't know what's going to happen next. I do think that fae stories are great for autumn, especially the whole idea of getting sort of swept away into like a magical world. So I am really excited for it, and I do believe my friend said that this is a fantasy standalone, which is kind of nice, because while I do love reading series, I already have so many series going on that I need to finish, and it's just nice sometimes to just pick up a book and finish a story in one go and not have to wait for other installments or like make it such a huge commitment. So very much looking forward to this one. Then I have two children's books, or maybe middle grade, by Lucy Strange. This is The Ghost of Goswater, and this is The Mermaid in the Mill Pond. I think these are probably going to be great for autumn, because on Goodreads these are both tagged as Gothic and Victorian, maybe also, I'm not entirely sure, but at least Gothic, and they both seem to be about some kind of mysterious creature. Here it's mentioned a ghost, and The Mermaid in the Mill Pond doesn't sound very scary, but the back of the book does sound a little bit more like mysterious, because it says, I don't know, something, and then, meanwhile, rumours are spreading about a vicious creature that lurks in the mill pond. Bess is sure it's all nonsense, until one night she sees something stir in the murky water. So yeah, this one is also very short, and it has illustrations, I just realised. Also, these covers are really pretty, both of them, and especially this one looks very autumnal with the leaves and kind of the bluish grey. I'm excited for these. These were a really good find at the charity shop. I got the feeling that someone who loves kind of similar books to me got rid of like part of their collection, because there were quite a few fantasy books and YA middle grade, all in English and all in really great condition. So I was very, very lucky. I snatched these up, but I also got a bunch of other books. I think it was all by the same person. So whoever you were, thank you. Then next I have a German book. This is Gretel Ritter by Cornelia Funke. I'm not sure what the English title is. I'm assuming it's been translated into English, maybe something like Ghost Night or Nights. And this is about a boy who goes to a boarding school, and then he sort of gets haunted by ghosts. I hadn't heard of this book before, but I've read Inkheart by Cornelia Funke. I've read it so many times as a kid, and I really love that book. For some reason I never read anything else by Cornelia Funke, I think, so I was very excited when I saw this at the charity shop. It's again in great condition, and it also has illustrations. Very beautiful, and I think this is going to be a great book. to read in autumn. Then I have a graphic novel adaptation of Wuthering Heights. And I think Wuthering Heights is one of those books that people either love or hate. And initially, the first time that I read it, I didn't love it because of its horrible characters. But then the second time, I started to appreciate it a lot more because of its atmosphere. Like, it's very gloomy, like you can really feel like you're out on the moors. I did love that aspect of it, and I do think that if I would ever reread it again, I do think I would like it even more. So I'm curious to see how it's going to translate into a graphic novel, especially because it, like, the structure of the classic story, it's like it starts with from this perspective of this guy who tells the story, or he hears it from like a housemate or something, and she starts telling the story, and then you, for a large part of the book, you're in that story, and then at the end of the book, I think you return to the guy who is listening to the story about what happened there years ago. So I'm interested to see how that's going to translate into a graphic novel. And also it looks very bright, like the colours for this graphic novel. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that's going to work, if the sort of same atmosphere that I got from the book is going to be translated into this graphic novel. Then I have another graphic novel, which is Ghosts by Raina Telgemeier, and this is a graphic novel for children. At least the audience looks quite young. I think it's going to be pretty like fun and happy. So even though it's about ghosts, I don't think it's going to be scary at all, but it's about two sisters who move to a new place, and then their neighbour tells them that there are ghosts around. From flipping through this, it also looks like this is more like a ghost story that has like Mexican influences, so that's going to be interesting because I don't think I've really read a story like that before. But yeah, I think if I'm going to read this, this is the perfect moment to do it because of the ghosts. Next, I have a book that I also found at the charity shop in great conditions, and I feel like this might have also belonged to the person who got rid of the Lucy Strange books. This is The Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. I've never actually read anything really written by Edgar Allan Poe, but I have read like a sort of an adaptation of, I think, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, like the story that this collection is named after. I enjoyed the adaptation way back when I read it. It's been years, and it's always made me curious to read more of Edgar Allan Poe, especially because these are quite short stories. I think it's kind of going to be a good introduction. And this is really the only classic that I have on this list, but I do feel like autumn is a great period to read classics, especially Victorian classics. I think one of my favourite books to read during autumn is usually North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, but I think I reread that last year. Maybe I feel like I read it too recently to reread it again. I don't want to like stop loving that because I've read it too much, so I'm not going to reread that again. The same for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is also one of those books that's perfect for autumn, but I've read it several times. I think I need to wait a year. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'll pick it up again. We'll see, but it's not really the plan. Then I have a comic that I would like to reread, which is The Witcher House of Glass. I read this a couple of years ago and I really enjoyed it. I think it gave this 4 stars, but I do feel like this might actually be 5 stars to reread it. It's what I loved about this was that it's sort of a standalone story. Like, there are more comics after this, but you can read this first volume and it's just a complete story. It's about this guy called, I always forget how to pronounce his name, but I think it's Geralt of Rivia, or is it Gerald? I think Geralt. It's always what I think. Like, I always think it's one thing and then it's the other thing, so not entirely sure. But I think pretty much everyone by now has heard of The Witcher, because of course there have been games, but even more recently it's been turned into a Netflix show and lots of people have watched it. So but yeah, if you've enjoyed the TV series, I do think you will enjoy this one as well. It's definitely a dark story from what I remember this first volume, but it was really, really good. and I am excited to reread it. Did I say what it's about? I don't remember. So it's about this guy called Gerald of Rivia, who is a witcher, which is someone who hunts monsters. And one of the things I loved about reading The Witcher, because I've also read the first actual book in the Witcher series, but what I loved about this was that it features like Slavic mythology, I think, so some of the creatures are a bit less familiar. I am a little bit less familiar with some of the creatures in these stories, so I thought that was really cool to kind of see a different kind of fantasy, and also that it's like dark fantasy. I'm not necessarily a horror fan, which is why you don't really see a lot of like horror on this list, but rather more like mysterious atmosphere kind of books. But dark fantasy is something I enjoy, and this is like perfect, I think. Then I have another German book, Der Drache mit den sieben Köpfen. I realized not too long ago this is actually apparently a German translation of a Dutch book. But I found it in a charity shop a couple of years ago, and this is a collection of stories for the autumn period. They're all around St. Michael, St. Martin and St. Nicholas, and some of these, I think they might be less familiar in some other countries, but especially St. Nicholas is very like well known in the Netherlands, not just as a Christian figure, but Sinterklaas is a holiday that's like celebrated by a lot of people. So the other two holidays are, I think, a little bit less familiar to at least to Dutch people. I knew of St. Martin because I used to live in Utrecht when I was young, and there it's, I don't know what the holiday is called, like in English, I don't know. In Dutch it's just St. Martin, but then on the 11th of November we would go out when it would be getting dark, and we had like a little lantern, and we would ring bells at houses, and we would sing songs related to St. Martin, and then we would get candy. So it's a little bit like Halloween, like how in other countries kids might dress up and go out to get candy, but then instead of dressing up you would have like a little lantern, and a lot of the time it would be homemade. So it's kind of similar to that, but I knew that because I was living in a part of the country where it's celebrated. It's not celebrated everywhere, so I don't think every Dutch person is going to be familiar with it. And then Saint Michael, I only know this because I went to a Waldorf or Steiner school, and there we celebrated Michaelmas, I think it's called, which I don't actually remember what we used to do, but it always, and the day always ended with a like giant fire, and the like 8th graders had to and one class would like sort of build a dragon out of wood and cloth, and then there were like the 8th graders had made spears, and they would throw them at the dragon, sort of trying to defeat it. I don't know. But yeah, it was a yearly thing, but somehow I've never really known the story behind it, so I think it's going to be good to brush up my knowledge a little bit. And I think Michaelmas is like the 29th of December, which is in a few days, so it's going to be the perfect moment to start this book, and just hopefully I can read like, I don't know, maybe a story every week or so. I'm not sure if I'm going to finish this entire collection this year, but we'll see. We are almost getting to the end of my stack of books. I have 2 more, and one of them is Monstrous Volume 1 by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. I've read this one years ago, and this one, I think this is the only one on my list that it's like properly horror. I think it's set in some sort of steampunk world, and from what I remember, the main character sort of gets infested by some sort of like creature. It is creepy. And even though I'm usually not really a horror fan, I do remember enjoying this. I'm just not sure if I enjoyed it enough to like continue with the series, and it's been so long that I just figured I would reread the series to see how I like it and to see if I am going to continue with the series. But definitely the artwork is going to be really lovely to look at again because it's just so pretty. And then the last one that I have on my list is The Raven Boys, My Maggie Stiefvater, and this is a YA fantasy. I've read this years ago, and it's about a girl called Blue who it's said that if she kisses her true love that he would die, and I don't think that concept is necessarily something I'm super interested, but I do remember that it was very atmospherical. Like the book was very slow in my memory, but you did really get that feeling of like being in the forest and kind of this mysterious story and there's a ghost somewhere. So I think this is a great story for autumn. And again, just like with the previous one, I kind of want to know if it's worth continuing the series, and I just don't remember enough about this first book to know if I should continue. And if I'm going to continue, I kind of want to remember what's happened in the first book, especially because I remember that this was not really one of those books that has like a very self-contained story within the first book. This very much feels like a setup for what's going to happen in the next books. So I do feel like if you're going to continue, you need to know what's happened here. So these are all the books I hope to read during this autumn. I'd be very curious to hear if you've read any of these or if you have any good autumn recommendations, because I could always use more. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and maybe I'll see you in my next one. Bye!